How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today we are going to discuss how does housing work in a prison or jail, only because, so you got the Richard Allen case happening, the Delphi murders, and now I believe we have the defense bringing up their witnesses. And of course, they're going back to the prison system, explaining his time in solitary confinement. He's deteriorating for mental health. And then now when they start to talk about how housing works in the prison, it's starting to become a bit confusing, especially now. You got all these different podcasters coming in. They're trying to explain it. And as I'm listening to them, I'm like, wow, they got some of it a little bit off. And I think that matters because I think they're mixing up some of these watches with statuses, and it becomes very confusing. So what I did was with Joe, we're going to break down how housing works. We're even going to talk about why a county inmate would be in a state facility, because mind you, he's a pretrial inmate. So very rarely will you find a pretrial inmate in a state facility, but it does happen. There are contracts and that the state could have with the county, and we'll explain when that can happen. And I think I have 3 reasons why Richard Allen would be there, which makes sense to me, but I can give you some other reasons why. And then we're going to break down how different housing works inside the facility, and we'll even talk about an override system. And that will kind of give you just a basic understanding of how housing works in a prison or jail. And it's not simple. It's not a simple process. And I think as these podcasters are trying to put it out there, they're trying to make it look like it's a lot more simple than it really is. And it's not, and they're confusing a lot. I watched it today, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a show on it, and I got Joe. Joe, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, indeed. Good evening, everybody. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Texas Department of Corrections of 29 years. I'm currently serving as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
And we love having you. Now, Joe, you obviously work, well, now you work in the jail, but you worked in the state, so you're familiar with both sides of the coin.
Right.
So, I mean, Joe, right off the bat, obviously it's not strange. I mean, it's a rare occasion, but we do know it does exist when you have a pretrial inmate in a state facility, correct? That's nothing that's strange to you, right? I mean, it could happen.
No, absolutely.
Because that's one of the discussions right now is like, why is a pretrial inmate in a state facility? Now, just so for the people on the outside looking in, yeah, usually jails are for those who have yet to be sentenced. If they are sentenced, if they have under a year, where the state is when they're sentenced, or if they have over a year, for the most part. But granted, there are times where the state may have to assist the county with housing one of their inmates. And I do have a couple of reasons here why that will occur. So what I'll do is I'll read a few off to you, Joe, if you want to elaborate a little bit on more. And then I got the 3 where I feel that Richard Allen would fall under. So I have, I think about 6 or 7 of just generalized reasons. And I'm sorry, I have 4 that I feel would be applicable to Richard Allen. Okay, so with that said, so now, mind you, guys, this is when the jail, the county, decides to say, you know what, we can't house this inmate here, and I'll explain the reasons why. Can we work with the state? We have a contract with the state. You think the state can go ahead and pick up this inmate for us so he could be better managed? So just in general, the first thing we have are going to be security concerns. So if the inmate is considered a high security risk due to the nature of the alleged crime, notoriety, or specific threats, a state facility may be better equipped to handle maximum security needs than a local jail. This is often the case with high-profile defendants to ensure both the inmate and the facility's security. So I've seen that, Joe. I'm sure you've seen that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes when you have a whole high-profile inmate who either has a past of evading arrest or, anything that can make him a flight risk, sometimes they will house them at state facilities because they're a more secure environment. They're built for the long term to hold, whereas counties are, I guess, what you can consider a temporary facility until, they're either convicted or found not guilty. So the facilities differ in nature, where your state facilities are a more secured environment, higher security, versus, your county jails, which, generally don't have outside pickets, or guard towers or anything of that nature. It's just a basic holding facility until the trial's done.
Right. And I think for the Richard Allen here, I did some reading, and I got something that the Carroll County Jail lacked the necessary resources to ensure Allen's safety, given the high-profile nature of his case. Sheriff Toby Lazenby expressed concerns about the jail's capacity to protect Allen, leading him to want him to be transferred to the Westville Correctional Facility. So again, very familiar with that process. The jail may not be able to do it. And also, I want to add something else. It's also the long-term management. This case, happened in 2017. He's going to trial now, 7 years later. I mean, that's a long time to be out of county jail. So I think when you start to realize that you got a guy in the county that's going to take long to get to trial, you may want to send them to jail or to the prison, because prison is usually able to accommodate more long-term stays at specialized housing. That's the added notch to that. Long-term stay in some level of specialized housing. So I also got, kind of relates to it, but the facility's resources and capabilities. State facilities generally have more specialized resources, such as mental health care. That's what I kind of talked about. Medical support or dedicated solitary confinement units. And we'll get that. I don't like that term. I would like to substitute that with isolated confinement or administrative segregation. I don't like the word solitary because it connects to a political agenda when we know we're not keeping inmates in the dark and having them pissing out windows here. So, but I have, which may be necessary for certain inmates. For high-profile, high-risk inmates, these resources are critical, especially if the inmate has specific medical or psychological needs, which, again, that falls into Richard Allen, because I have here for Richard Allen, facility resources. State facilities like Westville Correctional Facility are better equipped to handle inmates requiring higher security measures and specialized care. That's, and Allen was placed in a maximum security unit with 24-hour video surveillance and was under suicide watch accommodations that the county jail at that time could not provide. Again, Joe, that makes sense to you, correct?
Yeah, it does. And one thing that people need to understand is sometimes, your county jails are overflowing too, past capacity. Here in Texas, we have several counties, several surrounding counties around me that actually contract. We're so close to the Louisiana border, they actually contract with some of the Louisiana Department of Corrections that have empty wings that they use, that they house, county inmates there as overflow. Your county jails are what you would consider, most of them are considered basic needs, as far as medical and mental health, depending on their size. Whereas your DOC has pretty much around the clock medical care and, on demand mental health care. So, the resources and capabilities between the two are pretty night and day different.
Yeah, and guys, remember, Westville was also more equipped to handle inmates that may have special mental health concerns. So, granted, we're kind of on the fence of whether Richard Allen's faking it or not. But I'll be honest with you, it's so hard to make that determination if they are or they aren't. That most likely people just act on universal precaution, and the universal precaution is not to not give him care. The universal precaution is going to be you have to give him care, regardless of if you feel he's feigning it or not. The worst thing is if you don't do it and it's real, that's the problem. So in this case here, when he starts acting out and his behavior is a little bit erratic, even if it says he's faking it, he's faking it, it doesn't matter. They have to still accommodate those behaviors. So if the county jail can't do it, Westville may be more equipped because they may have a more long-term housing when it comes to dealing with special need inmates. But I will tell you one other thing. If it's a county inmate, the county inmate should not be allowed to interact with the state inmate. Because remember, the state inmate are convicted. The county inmate isn't. So if something happens to that county inmate why they're in the state facility, it's a tremendous lawsuit. So that's another reason why you don't have the county inmate interact with the state inmate, because those are convicted felons that are going to be around that pre-trial detained inmate, whatever it is, that hasn't been convicted yet. So that person right off the bat has to be separated from those state inmates. At no point are you ever going to have a pretrial inmate in state custody because the county sent them that way in the same area of state inmates? And you agree with that, right, Joe?
Oh yeah, definitely. They never let the two mingle, for obvious reasons. So yeah, you'll never see a facility where they house county and state inmates at the same time and allow them to interact with each other.
Yeah, and then Joe, you did mention overcrowding. I do have that. Some county jails may lack the space to securely house a high-profile pretrial inmate, especially if they require isolation from the general population. In such cases, the inmate might be transferred to a state facility with more capacity, and that's kind of what you just touched on. Let me get the next one. I also have protection from other inmates. High-profile pretrial inmates can face significant threats from other inmates, especially in county jails, where housing options are limited, and a state facility can often provide the necessary segregation or protective custody to keep the inmate safe. And look what we're saying here. The segregation or protective custody to keep the inmate safe. And it's so funny because when you watch these podcasters go back and forth, Joe, it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. They love to interpret the isolation or the protective custody as solitary. And now you got the person suffering. And so, well, wait a second. First off, it's not solitary. He's being isolated because we don't want him targeted by inmates that may want to come at him for, you guys on the media are putting all this stuff out there. The trial can go any way now. He's being convicted of killing 2 girls at any moment. And by the way, this trial is publicized, or not the trial itself, but people are, the trial is actually being done in closed doors, but people are going out providing their own interpretation, the news, whatever it is. So every day after the day is done, they go out, they release things out to the world. And then now, the facilities, they got access to current events. They got access to TV, access to news, magazines, whatever it is. So now, whatever happens in this trial, whatever is discovered, that becomes a concern for us in managing Richard Allen's safety. So with that said, they have to be isolated because we don't know what's coming next. But, you isolate him and it's like, well, that's why his mental health. But what would you like us to do? Would you like us to now have him around all the inmates and his mental health will deteriorate there too because he's going to be feeling threatened all day? So imagine him living in an area where he doesn't know where the threat's coming from, being hyper vigilant. You don't think that could take a toll on you either? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So at this point here, you know what? Let's do this. Let's manage him in isolation and PC because we can control that. I can't control 50 inmates, but I can control this person right here, separated from everyone else, and then mental health and medical and custody staff. We'll see him daily to hopefully deal with any concerns when the person is in isolation, like being left alone. But that always seems to be the either or damn scenario that we're trapped in. Correct?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. But people are quick. The news media is quick to throw out the term solitary. And, the general public thinks Shawshank Redemption, we throw them in a hole and we're feeding them bread and water and they're in, this dark, dismal place with no light. And, that's not the case. Solitary has been used for the last 30 years as a punitive term. It's something that was issued in, because of a disciplinary hearing. It was a term of confinement away from everybody else. It's all solitary confinement. Generally meant. We have since kind of graduated to different terms to try to ease the public and help the public and the news media understand. We use terms like administrative segregation or administrative separation or, protective custody, isolation, whatever you want to, But given the high profile, status of this case, this is not somebody that can walk into a jail and just go straight out to the general public, especially if, the county where this trial is being held is a small county, one of those counties where everybody knows everybody's business. Regardless, the man is being accused of killing 2 girls. So he is definitely not safe to walk around in general population, whether it be county or whether it be state if he's convicted. So therefore we have to look out for his best interests and his health and welfare too. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but it is part of our job. We have to protect them just as much as we have to protect the public. Therefore, we got to make sure that they're in an area of our facility where they're going to be safe, where they, don't have to fear any kind of retribution or any kind of, assaults or threats of any kind, or, any kind of violence. We have to ensure his health. We have to ensure his welfare. We have to look at it. We have to look at it after his mental health needs, address all those health concerns. It's just something that we have to do. And, unfortunately in this incident, or in this instance, he has to be in an area away from everybody else, until such time as, he either goes to trial and becomes a DOC, Department of Corrections offender, or, the case is dismissed. Either way, we have a duty to provide for him and to him as much as we have for the public, to the public, and for the public.
Yeah, and there are people that want to see him carried out in trial and be there for whatever the sentence may be, whether he's guilty or not. Now, obviously, we just touched on this, but you have protection from other inmates. So high-profile pretrial inmates can face significant threats from other inmates, especially in county jails where housing options are limited. A state facility can often provide the necessary segregation or protective custody to keep the inmates safe. No need to repeat that. All right, then we got this is the publicity and media concerns. For well-known cases, the local jail might lack the infrastructure to handle increased media attention or public interest. Transferring the inmate to a state facility can reduce this strain on local resources and provide a more controlled environment. I think our biggest concern is when you have a case like this and there's an inmate that you have in your facility that is this high-profile case, you got to keep up with the current events with what's going on with that individual. Because sometimes, even if they don't request some level of isolation or protective custody, you may just have to put them in there without their approval. It's like, you know what, we'll deal with it later, but I'm going to put him in there because I also need to guarantee his safety. And at the end of the day, even if he said no, the liability is still on the house.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, the liability is definitely on us. We have to err on the side of caution, regardless whether he wants it or not. And the other good thing too, about him being in a DOC facility, is, it's not only more a more secure environment to hold him, that's also a more secure environment to protect him. Because unfortunately, with high profile cases, the media outlets are, they scramble to try to get the story straight from him. They have a harder time getting access to him in a Department of Corrections style or a state facility than they would a county jail. So him being in a DOC is actually a good thing for the public, because he doesn't have a chance to get his story out there. He doesn't have a chance. The media doesn't have a chance to glorify this guy or terrify this guy by allowing him to get his version of what's going on out there. So it's kind of a good thing too.
Yeah, and guys, we already mentioned the county requests or legal agreements. So in some cases, the county might work with state officials to arrange for the inmate housing in a state facility if local resources are insufficient, which kind of what we talked about, or if there's a specific reason to believe the inmate needs more specialized handling. The legal logistical considerations, I said, also falls in place with Allen, because housing Allen in a state facility allowed for more controlled management of his detention, addressing both security and logistical challenges associated with this case. I think that's the umbrella. The umbrella is what the state is able to do that the county can't. And there were four things that people had. The main four things was, they said, why was he housed in maximum security? And we said, despite being a pretrial detainee, Allen was housed in a maximum security unit at Westville Correctional Facility. This placement may be uncommon for individuals awaiting trial, and it did raise concerns, but it is done. It's a practice that we are familiar with, whether it's done a lot. But it's usually when the county steps up and says, we can't handle this, and the state will say, okay, we have a contract, let's do it. Then people started mentioning about the mental health decline. So reports indicate that Allen's mental health deteriorated during his confinement, with observations of significant weight loss and signs of psychosis. His defense attorneys argued that the conditions of his detention contributed to his decline. Then you had the allegation of mistreatment. So they also say that Allen was segregated from everyone, but then they also say he was getting threatened from inmates. An inmate at Westville Correctional Facility alleged that Allen was subjected to abuse and mistreatment by staff, inmates, which further complicated his housing situation. Again, I mean, this is just playing into, the door that was opened. Hey, if you want to settle this, let's now. Well, if you're saying the facility's housing is bad, well, what happened? Well, staff mistreated him. Okay, prove it. Inmates were yelling this. Okay, but you said that, you kind of said that solitary, which, again, I hate using that term, but was no good for him. But then you're saying inmates were yelling at him. So what's going on here? You can't have two. It's either he's away or he's not. So it looks like they were trying to cover everything. Let's just cover the fact that he's isolated. And then if you want to put him in GP, let's just go ahead because I'll guarantee you if he was, which he can't be in GP, because remember, he's a county inmate, but hypothetically, in a hypothetical world, if he was put in a GP setting and the inmate started threatening him, that would be their excuse at that point. You wouldn't have a middle. It would be he's left alone, he's mental health decompensating, or he's being threatened by inmates, which, again, wouldn't be the case here because, or shouldn't be the case because he's a county inmate. And then you have the legal access challenge. The distance between Allen's housing facility and his legal team, along with restrictive visitation conditions, hindered effective attorney-client communication. Defense attorneys highlighted difficulties in consulting with Allen due to these factors. Guys, there's video conferencing now. There's a bunch of stuff that can happen. I'm sorry for the lawyers. You got to drive. You're getting paid some money. Got to spend some money on some of that gas. That's your client, So I don't buy into that excuse because there's so many ways. Video teleconferencing now is a bunch of stuff. But, well, if you move them, I can't get to them all the time. Well, send somebody because that's your responsibility. We don't. Sometimes obviously the management of an inmate's safety is what our priority is. And if it happens to be that his safety is over here, then gas up, lawyer, because if something happens to that inmate, that's on us. That's not on you. So we're going to move them. And then you better figure out how you're going to get to them. I'm sorry, but because sometimes but Joe, sometimes they'll do that.
Oh yeah.
In the hope to limit our ability to control where that inmate gets housed. Yep. Even if they're more problematic, this inmate's not good for the county. Why? No, you got to keep him in the county. No, he's problematic. We can't house him here. We got to send him to the state. Well, if you do that, then our access to him, figure it out.
Yeah.
His safety and priority comes first. You figure out the access. Right now, this has to be done because if something happens to him, you'll sue us on that too. So, So I got that. I hope that covers a little bit of the county part. But now I thought me and Joe could explore this real quick, and this is kind of how. I don't think I need this anymore. I took some notes earlier today. So this is now this is how housing may work at prisons or jails. But guys, there's no universal system here. You're going to find that a lot of facilities, jails, state by state, county by county, may do things differently. In some states, you have 6 levels of custody, and some states you have 4. I think just know that you go from the most restrictive to the least restrictive. So however many layers that is, that's the goal, right? Inmates come in at some level of restriction, and then they got to work their way ultimately down to the least amount of restriction. And it's a complicated process. And the funny thing is, this is where these podcasters and stuff, they're all getting this part wrong. I'm telling you something. If I was the state on this, I'd be looking for people. I know they had the warden on, but I would kind of be watching this right now because I see a lot of good arguments that would be easily able to contest what's being thrown out, because right now they're discrediting the management of Richard Allen, which is why we're getting involved now, because you're discrediting the system in the process, because you're using the general idea of what you think solitary confinement is to play it out as Richard Allen. Well, we all know what solitary confinement is. And you know what? You don't know, because you're also calling it wrong. So this is why it's good to have these dialogues and say, hey, guys, you're wrong. Solitary confinement, these inmates, first of all, that doesn't exist. Second off, these inmates are seen every day by mental health. There's so many things here. So the first thing I wanted to talk about here, so in the Richard Allen case, I think the confusion is, I think a lot of people believe that the suicide watch is actually a housing, and it's not. It's technically a stabilization unit, and you don't want to keep inmates there more than 72 hours. I mean, you're going to start trying to get them discharged because it is a very highly restrictive environment. But with that said, the control of that discharge is, yeah, it's on mental health. I get it, but it's really on the inmate. Because if the inmate doesn't want to go back to the housing unit or doesn't want to go back to, wherever he's assigned, they will act up and they will say things that automatically have to put him back on suicide watch, because the moment that they say that they're going to hurt themselves, you can't risk it, because even if you feel that they're faking it, their want for attention will ultimately up the game, up the ante. So, I mean, Joe, how many inmates don't want to kill themselves, but when they're not when no one's listening to them and they're playing that game, it's like, you know what, I'm going to go this far because I know the officer's going to save me. And it turns out the officer, let's say, it's like, I'm not buying into that. And it turns out the guy may fake an attempt, but it turned out it was real. Not that he wanted to kill himself. He was trying to, do a little bit of a stunt. But unfortunately, when he didn't get the intention was actually what he needed to save his life. But Joe, that's something you see, right? The kind of the back and forth of these watches.
Yeah, I mean, they say the magic words. Sometimes, there's been a handful of times in my career where I've seen they've generally needed and wanted the help. A handful of times they're using it as a manipulation tactic because they're not getting their way or they're trying to get something that they want. A suicide watch is more of a status than it is a housing. We have them in a confined area with no fixed objects in the cell that they, can hang themselves from, partitions or fixtures or bars or any of that kind of, especially for high profile inmates, because the first 72 hours of their incarceration, whether it be in a county facility or a prison, or detrimental. That's when you're going to see the most change. And after that 72 hours, you can have them reassessed by mental health, and at that point they can make the determination, whether or not they feel that this inmate is any kind of a risk. They base it on they base it on 3 categories: low, medium, and high. Low meaning, of course, he's the lowest risk there that he's going to do any self-harm, and high being the highest that self-harm could be imminent. So it's when it comes to the suicide watches itself, it's more of a status than it is a housing right. scheme.
And guys, I want to mention some. Obviously, there are people that do deserve that type of attention. I mean, they are going through it, and we do have trained professionals that can handle it, but there's also a lot of perks. And there are some people that are going to want to manipulate that part of the system. And that's where we have to kind of find a balance. But to be honest with you, this is where the inmate does have the upper hand, because it's the boy that cries wolf. You can't have the boy cry wolf and not tend to it, because God forbid you don't, and the boy gets eaten. We don't have that option in corrections. So that is an advantage. That if you have inmates that are looking to manipulate the system, there's a big vulnerability with us. It's a good thing, because it kind of puts the judgment away from us, where it's like, it doesn't matter if he's faking it or not. We're not here to judge. Just he says he's going to hurt himself, but he wants this. It doesn't matter. He says he's going to hurt himself, and they kind of know that. So it's just a matter of energy, really. How much energy we're going to do this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But it's not a housing unit, which means some of the confusion here is when they said he was on watch, he was given his tablet. He was allowed to make phone calls with his family. One of the mental health people decided that he can get a visit. It's like, well, you don't do that on a constant watch. I mean, later on, maybe when you downgrade the watch and, even past close watch. So constant watch should be second by second. Close watch could be every 15 minutes, let's say. It depends on the policy of the procedure. But you work your way down, if I say I'm going to kill myself, let's just say that. All right, so we got to manage that impulse, right? So I get stripped down, maybe turtle gown, depending on how erratic I am. I get put into a cell that has nothing, pretty much, nothing where I can hurt myself. And there's an officer right in front of me or on a camera watching me every second of the day. That's why there's cameras on individuals, because they're more concerned about that person's behavior, because that's another thing. If he was to hurt himself and they said, well, why wasn't it be a watch? It's okay. Now he's watched too much and he's losing. It's just So you got to pick a side, man. So it's like, okay, so you're being watched. So now if I was an officer and I'm watching an inmate on constant watch, I don't want them with nothing. I don't, because I don't want, that's liability for me. So if mental health decides to say, hey, I know he's on a constant watch, but give him a tablet. Nope, because he can hurt himself with the tablet.
Yep.
That's on me now. So I think at that point, safety and security will supersede mental health requests, because that is a safety and security concern. Now, granted, the person goes down a notch and goes to like what they call maybe a close watch. It's every 15 minutes. They still don't get anything. I'm trying to discharge you. And the other reason why you don't want to do it is you don't want to make it comfortable to the point where they want to live there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe. I see, you got something on that one.
Yeah, exactly. They think, especially if these guys are in facilities that don't have air conditioning, if they're temper cool, and they know that they're going to get moved to an air conditioned room, while they're on suicide watch, especially during the summers. We used to call it the crazy train every weekend. We would have in DOC, we would have them, try to nick themselves or do something stupid to get, transported to the psychiatric unit. But, thankfully now, thanks to teleconferencing and Zoom and all these platforms where, they don't have to be bused to these facilities to see a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist could see them right there on a laptop or on the kiosk, through NCIC or Odyssey or any of these platforms. So that manipulation tactic is gone now. So, and that's exactly it. We don't want them to think that, they can actually stay in this comfortable environment for a lengthy period of time, so yeah, even for me, it doesn't matter if they're low, medium, or high risk. If they're in that gown, they don't get nothing, period. Not a thing. You're not going to get, a pillow. You're not going to get a suicide blanket. You're going to get your turtle gown. And that's it. Yep. And when psych says that you're cleared and you can go back to general population, then you can have all your little stuff back. But I'm not going to sit there and make it comfortable for you while you're there, because that's not what suicide watch is for.
And usually, guys, a facility that has a mental health unit or a treatment unit, a therapeutic community, is probably going to have a stabilization unit as well, because it kind of blends in. Because again, you could have the inmates that are acting erratic, and you have the mental health professionals already there. So let's get them into the stabilization unit. Let's kind of go through the motions and then bring them back. The difference with Richard Allen is that he's not allowed, or he shouldn't be allowed, to mix with the state inmates. So I don't know how it was housed there. I had a couple things in my head, but I don't know if they could put him, if he was trying to kill himself, they could put him in a stabilization unit, because even if there's other inmates there, they're not connecting to each other. So maybe that's where he could have heard shit being said, because maybe they only had one stabilization unit. And then maybe at that point, that's where he's getting the threats from the other inmates inside the stabilization unit, because that may be the only time where they're not physically in front of each other, but they're in the same area, but it's very controlled. They don't interact with each other, but they could be screaming back and forth. But then after that's done, they would have to go ahead and put them back into whatever the housing unit is. But some cases, what some people may do, and I've seen it, is get a little lazy and they take the stuff out of his room and they just put the thing on the door, constant watch, and they empty out. And that could have been the case here. I don't think that's the case here, because if they are saying that the inmates did speak to him, maybe that was the time they could have done it, when he was in the stabilization unit. After I think about it right now, which could be explained. That would be good to be explained. But with that said, there are some places where it's like, maybe we don't want this interaction. So why don't we take this stuff out, and then we can make that his constant watch, put an officer in front of him and put it on the door. I've seen that happen. I don't think that may be the case here. But I want people to also know something. So as I mentioned, it's a step down process. Usually after every Usually you try to get the discharge between 24 to 72 hours. You want to manage whatever the impulsive behavior is, but you don't want to keep them there so long that they start to mentally decompensate, because that area is a constant watch. You're stripped down. I mean, that's a tough one, so I get it. But you need that amount of control. And I don't think that you should be, as I said, having family calls and stuff at that point, because there's counter influence there. If I'm mental health and I got to know everything that's affecting you right now, I can't have other people doing that. I can't have other people coming in messing with that. I need total control. And the funny thing is, everybody wants to blame the system at this point, but at the same time, he was still able to talk to his family, over 700 phone calls.
Yeah.
You don't know if it's the system. You don't know if it's family. I mean, you really don't. I'm going to be honest with you, because there was never a moment where you can clearly distinguish, which side had an effect on the other. I think, to be honest with you, and I mentioned the other video, I think he wanted to confess to what he did. I think that the gentleman did it. I do. And I think he wanted to confess because he had some alone time. He had some me time. And I think that is what's weighing down on him, what he did. I think he could have some remorse and guilt towards it. Again, but that's just my opinion. I'm allowed to have an opinion. And maybe he didn't do it. I don't know. But I don't think we'll ever know. I'll be honest with you, even whether he's found guilty or not, I just don't think that this case wasn't handled the best. So I think either way, even if he gets found guilty, he can get an appeal process in. So anyway, so that's kind of the constant watch status. You don't want to keep people there for, longer than 3 days. There's a discharge process there. But one thing I would like to say is, I wish they would have asked this, because I'm listening, is how many times was he discharged and he acted out right after he was discharged? Because that happens a lot. For the inmates that rather stay there, what they do is they wait till they know they're going to get discharged. And then when they go to take him out, they're like, well, I'm going to hurt myself. Now, I don't know if that's the case for Richard Allen, because Richard Allen should be going back to a unit by himself if he's in a stabilization unit. But you don't know. You don't know. You don't know if he developed a pattern where he felt that the SU was more comfortable for him. Maybe because he got attention. Maybe mental health was giving him what he wanted when he was in that stabilization unit. As Dr. Waller was saying, he was getting the phone calls. He was talking to his family and whatever it is. So maybe he found things there was more easier to get. So he'd rather stay there because he can kind of go around custody and manipulate his way through mental health. So why am I going to want to go back to the unit when I can work directly with mental health in the stabilization unit? So I'd be very, again, speculating, but I'd be very curious to see, if he was discharged every 3 days and then did he act out and get put back on because maybe he felt that his time in the stabilization unit was a bit simpler because he was able to work directly with mental health. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Why deal with 6 people when you can only, when you only have to deal with one? I don't know how many times he's been in there as far as mental health wise, but it sounds like that facility's kind of gone above and beyond extending an olive branch to this guy, in order to keep him from decompensating, because I'm sure being in a DOC facility versus a county jail is probably a good stressor in itself. The constant yelling, banging, and everything that goes on in a state facility versus a county jail. And, then on top of that, he's got he's weighing the sentence that he may or may not get. Or like you said, he could be starting to show remorse for what he's done. There's a multitude of things that, as far as pros and cons of him being there. And, but it sounds like for him, it's more pros and cons. Yep.
And I'm going to add something. I was watching something with the Dr. Monica Waller. I think her name is Waller. And there's a part where they said in the transcript or whatever, the people that are reading back what happened from the trial, that when he went to confess and his mental health wasn't all there, she tried to convince him not to confess. And I disagree with that too. We're always told if someone wants to make a confession to another crime, granted, you forward that up. Tell the administrator, tell the internal investigation, whatever it is, and let them decide. I know it's a mental health concern, but that confession may be needed. And I would not deter the person. It could be absurd, but I would just be very careful when you're telling someone. I mean, if it's a legit thing, I'm not saying they're confessing to, killing something absurd. I'm talking about in this case here, this is what I've done, blah, blah, blah. So I wouldn't confess to that now. No.
That's not her place.
That's not her place. I agree. And that was mentioned. Now, Joe, I do want to explain something else. So now for a guy that's a county inmate that can't mix with GP, even if he was a low-level offender, but maybe had mental health concerns, pre-trial, whatever he's going through, whatever, low-level offender, let's say, but he was a county inmate, he automatically gets max status. That's not going to change, at least not until he's sentenced. So right now, he is going to, Richard Allen, even if he's on his best behavior, whatnot, he is going to be a max status inmate at a state facility because he is technically a county inmate, and the max level is the best way that you can protect them. It's got the highest level of restriction, and it's a more controlled environment. So his classification technically it's not a state classification. Technically, he's still under county. So the universal precaution is keep a max status. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, to a certain degree, if he's being housed by himself. Now, if he's being housed at a state facility with other county inmates from the same county facility, such as like what the surrounding counties around me do with Louisiana DOC, they house them where they're completely away from DOC offenders by sight and sound, but they have their own rec yard. So they go out to wreck together and all that stuff together. But in his case, given the high profile crime, his mental health acting out, there's a lot of factors that go into it. Even though they're not state DOC state classified, they're still classified county, and they still base the classification on the crime, his prior, institutional adjustment record. If he was a frequent flyer in the jail, every time he's been in jail, has he been well behaved? Did he follow the rules, or was he a chronic rule violator? And we even go by that in the DOC. We base our custody status off of their institutional adjustment record from both the times that they've been at the county and their prior times at DOC if they've done multiple sentences. So, there's a whole multitude of things that go into that. But given the fact, if he's being housed there by himself, absolutely max custody is the way to go, because it's going to be the only way you can manage it, to keep people from getting to him, to keep, him from getting to people. It's less people for him to be able to manipulate, because he's more separated and isolated from everybody. Even though you have mental health, you have the chaplain, you have medical, you have all these people who are coming down there and checking on him on a daily basis, and sometimes twice a day.
Right. Now, Joe, you know what I'll do just to kind of save time on the show, because I don't, there's a lot that we had covered. And I think that if we cover how we classify inmates in general in the state, I don't think it applies right now, because we're talking about technically a county inmate doing state time. So they're not going to be classified as a regular state inmate. But now, granted, if he ever gets sentenced, we could revisit the show and talk about certain things. So the classification process, technically, the objective scoring, where he scores on the list, his points, whatever it is, it's really not going to apply here, because in this case here, he's going to be a max inmate. He's by himself. He's most likely I don't know if they have a unit like you said, but I have heard of that. But I think he's by himself. He can't mix in. So they're already going to give him max status. His level of security, I said, until he becomes state, we don't know yet. I mean, his amount, there's so many things that go into play of what gives somebody status. It's more than just their time. At first, it will be their time. Their time is a heavy component of it. But there's more to it than just their time. A lot of people will be like, wow, I can't believe you got a guy with 30 years that maybe has like a lower level status. Well, it's other things than time. Time's a factor, but it's not the only thing. But at the very beginning when they enter, time is definitely, because in order for you to be eligible for lower level status, you do have to complete a certain amount of your time. And then that's where it opens. But that's not going to apply so much here right now. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of the classification process. Don't want to get too overwhelming. I do want to, I'm going to get rid of pretrial versus convicted inmates. We kind of touched on that. Disciplinary and behavioral concerns, I'm not going to touch on that. Program and rehabilitation opportunities, these are things they have to provide them, but it doesn't affect. I will touch on these last four, Joe. I think these last four matter. So he is a special case. He is a high-profile inmate. So one of the things I have here is this, Richard Allen may receive unique housing considerations due to public attention, security risk, or safety concerns. That's actually the county making the move for the state. That is the special housing right there, because then the state just picks it up and does what they do normally with high-profile inmates. And then you got the media attention. We talked about that safety protocol and the challenges associated with managing high-profile inmates in a correctional environment. We talked about that. So, again, I think the move from the county to state makes it specialized. So I think we can move past this one unless you have anything with that, Joe. We touched on this.
No, well, I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yeah. So the transparency in administrative housing, such as intake or observation units where inmates might be placed temporarily for evaluation. So I want people to know something here. That's kind of like the suicide watch. It's not a permanent housing unit. Administrative housing could be something where administration has designated, but it's not meant to be permanent or long-term. It's just meant to, let's see what we got to do with this individual. That could be for investigative purposes, for whatever you're investigating. I want to investigate. There's a threat on Richard Allen. So in the meantime, let's hold him here. But having said that, I don't think that's going to apply much to him either, because he's already in separate housing long term. I don't think that they know there's a potential threat. They know that he's a high profile inmate. So we're taking all the universal precautions. So we can kind of, because the problem is that everybody uses these terms. They're not universal. They're not universal. And to try to, I'm trying to kind of generalize it here, but administrative housing at one state can mean something totally different in another state. So the basic generalized premise here is that administration always has the oversight of where someone can be housed. But if they ever house them in some place that's going to be restrictive, highly restrictive, there has to be a time frame, because that kind of protects the retaliatory aspect of it all. So like if I have an inmate that even administrative segregation is a punitive housing unit, you can't house them there forever. There's a time frame. If there's an investigation, you better get it done in 72 hours, because I can't keep them there. If there's an administrative constant watch, because that can happen. Mental health may not feel they need it. Administration can say, well, you know what? I still want to do it. So mental health may say, okay, but that's on you. Okay, but you'll still clear them, but we'll make this an administrative constant watch, but you better get that done in 72 hours. So I always look at administrative housing as temporary housing, like it said, with a time limit. And then you got to make sure you don't exceed that time limit. And if you do, you better have serious justifications, because those administrative housings usually have the most restriction. I mean, is that kind of a good catch-all? It's not, not perfect, but would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, and what makes it bad is that the media latches onto these terms and they make them sound so barbaric in nature. Cool Hand Luke style. What we generally call it either administrative separation or security detention. Something that where it is generalized and categorized as, a need to be separated from the general population, a need to be separated from the staff, or a need for a possible watch for mental health crisis. So it's not a barbaric area. It's just a more controlled environment where we can keep a closer watch, where we're not worried about 500 other inmates in the background while we're trying to pay attention to this one. Where the area he's being housed, we can be more focused on this one instead of the 500. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a much smoother process for both parties.
Yeah, and the reason why it becomes confusing is a lot of times people change the names of these housing because they want to make it sound more political friendly.
Yeah.
It's administrative segregation. No, it's restrictive housing. No, it's restorative housing because they got to earn their stuff back. And at the end of the day, it's what becomes confusing. But if you go back to, how it operates, usually it's the same. It's the same. It's the title, the label that changes, which I get.
Another politically correct term, security housing unit. I mean, it's all the same.
It's all, and I get it, but I don't want to, but it does make it very confusing when, one state's more ahead of the times than the other.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, you're here and they're over there. And it's like, well, guys, that's the same thing. Well, we call it this. But it's the same thing. Yeah. It's the same exact thing. It's just we put a gentler term on it and whatever it is. So I think the inconsistency usually comes with how it's labeled. And then, maybe some extent on how it's carried out. But most of the time, it's how it's labeled. So I want to mention again, real quick, this falls into protective custody and segregation. Again, I don't like solitary confinement. I hate that term. Me and Russ talked about the other day. Joe hates that term. It's a separation. But in this case here, the separation is, this is twofold here because he has a mental health concern as well. But it's the protective custody. And this is twofold here with the protective custody. Outside the mental health, you got the protective custody because it's a high-profile case. And you got the protective custody because he's a county inmate. So having said that, he has to be segregated. And again, people that argue, well, he's left, no, they're watched. Trust me, mental health's going to come there every day. Administration may visit there once a week. I mean, this is a close custody unit that has very limited interaction. But again, you cannot put this individual in the GP. So there is no option. The option is they have to be segregated. They have to be put in PC. So I just wish people would stop intertwining the PC with solitary. It's not the first off, solitary. I hate that term, as I said, but I think people equate solitary in their mind to something punitive. Now, when they see protective custody, you equate protective custody to something. It's not. Everything about protective custody is to protect that inmate, and they're going to get what they're supposed to get as close as they could as a GP setting. But this gets me upset because when he's in solitary. No, he's in protective custody. Yeah, but he's isolated from other inmates. He has to be isolated from other inmates. So, I mean, when they ask these questions on the stand, they're like, well, the person's decompensating. Because here's my biggest concern. Richard Allen, let's say they say, you know what? The confessions are going to be no good because he was under duress, because he was in these conditions at the Indiana Department of Corrections. So years down the line, he puts a civil suit. It opens up the door for a huge, huge payout. It opens up the door because now my confession, because I was under. Okay, hold on. So a couple years later, when this whole thing passes over, he puts in and puts in for the civil suit. And winds up making a lot of money, and it could be someone that's just manipulating the system. So first he manipulates the system to get out of a guilty charge, then he manipulates the system to get out of millions and millions and millions and to get millions and millions of dollars. So, I mean, we got to understand what the purposes are. And we got to understand, as I said, if we're going to sit there and defend the system or go against it, you got to know what it is that stands in the middle of that. So protective custody is not it shouldn't equate to anything punitive. It's every effort there is to protect the inmate. And again, Joe, you have to admit, Joe, if we didn't put this person in protective custody, we'd be sued anyway, because if he gets killed, that's on us.
Absolutely.
I love how these people, they believe prison and jail runs on either or. And it's not. It's not. There's fine balances everywhere across the line. But for these people here that don't understand the system, and it's like, well, if you got to, it's like, well, you know what? You can't put them in solitary. Okay, fine. But you can't put them in GP either. Well, do you know you just gave us no option?
Yeah.
Well, then why don't we just release them? I'm sorry, I didn't know we couldn't do that. Let's just release the individual. That's the pressure from the outside, right? Would you agree, Joe?
Yeah, that is, and it's a lesser of two evils, because you got half of them that are for separation and the most restrictive environments, and then you got the other half that think it's just absolutely the most barbaric conditions, and they don't understand that these people that are in protective custody get checked on more by administrative staff than your general populations do on a daily basis. People in protective custody see your administrators, they see your supervisors, they see their mental health. Medical comes on the beat twice a day, if not more. So they have more access to the staff and the upper administration than your general GP inmates will ever have in their careers.
Right. And you want to hear something, Joe, as we get to this last part, mental health and medical needs. So, guys, this isn't always the case, but just to put it out there, because as I said, there are inmates that obviously do require it. My biggest thing is people that manipulate the system. That's the focus right now. And I'm sure people that have that know that there are people that do suffer mental health concerns. They don't want people manipulating the system. So with that said, you get someone who is having this mental health breakdown, but has clarity in so many different things. This is what I did. I still recognize my wife. I still recognize my kids. I still want to be moved here. That's another thing. Having these concerns and then still being able to I want to be moved here and make these requests. Because I heard that there were certain requests about his housing. And again, I'm only going by what people are saying on the podcast. But either way, there's, when people go through this decompensation, whatever it is, they're not seeing the world clearly. From what I've witnessed, and I'm not a mental health professional, but I've witnessed enough. I don't have to say a diagnosis to negate the fact, you see what's in front of you. But the other thing is in the overall is that when you have someone that could be, decompensating, mental health will not mess around. They will not mess around. If whatever that area is that the person could be decompensating in, they will try to say, you know what, we got to get this person out. At this point, they're not going to be a good fit for this facility. Now he may have to go to a state hospital. That could be the next level. You're not going to keep the person in the same environment in which they're decompensating. And I've seen that happen. It's like, hey, this guy, it can't even make it in this facility. We're going to have to take him to a state facility, try to find a bed for him where he could be better managed. And also, sometimes, I don't know if the meds that he's taken are forced meds. I know he's prescribed meds. And sometimes people could be on a forced med protocol, but they're only on the forced med protocol in case, I don't know how Indiana State works it, but in case they decide not to take the meds, we're able to go ahead and provide them with the meds because they're psychotropic meds. But with that said, sometimes if you're going through a legal case and you're trying to say that you're decompensating, that medication looks good on your record. The Haldol, whatever it is, it looks good on your record. So if you're trying to play the system, you're going to take the meds. Now, some people who are decompensating, you got to force those meds on them because they don't believe they're decompensating. They don't want the meds. But you get another person who's like, oh, I want the meds. Give me the meds. I need the meds. I'm not saying, nothing's a catch-all. But when they're saying, well, he's on Haldol, he's on this, he's like, okay, he could be. But they also could be that it looks good. If he was mentally breaking down, you don't think that you need that type of medication for proof because they're pushing on that. Well, he was on this, he was on that. Well, if he was having a mental breakdown, he should be. But did he request the medication? Out of curiosity, I don't know. I mean, but it looks good. If you're going to go the whole route, you might as well go the whole route. And the people that are prescribing to it say, well, they don't know if he's feigning it or not. Well, how do you know if you got to prescribe it to him? Well, we do because we can't tell you if he's faking it or not. But we're not going to risk, it. So if he needs it, he needs it. So all because someone's prescribed it doesn't guarantee that they're not feigning an illness. So I thought that was unique. And as I said, it's a touchy case. The reason why me, Joe, and Russ are talking about it is because it's another shot at the system. It's just another shot at the system. If he did kill these two girls and then he's able to pull back a confession because the system made him deteriorate mentally, it just opens up a door for just so many things that are it's not being opened in the same way or the way it should be. Like right now, guys, we are above and beyond in what we have to do with the medical treatment of inmates and the mental health of inmates. They get better care than most of us get on the streets. And now to use this as a case and then open up the doors to everything else. It's like, you know what? Well, if that's the case, then let's open up another federal lawsuit here and here, when it's like, hey, why don't you just go bring the jury, bring the judge, and let's watch what the mental health professionals do. Let's watch see it in action. If everybody wants to talk about how bad the environment is and that this confession is really, then get off your asses, go out to the facilities and watch how it operates. Watch the staff. They should be dedicated. They do what they got to do, and watch the games that are played in there too, where it's like, you know, hey guys, he may be having a mental health breakdown, but man, right during the breakdown, he said he said what he wants. You know, I'm eating all this, blah blah blah, and I want to be moved. Well, that's pretty clear. You just drank out of the toilet, which was a weird behavior, but then you knew exactly what you wanted. You wanted to be moved. You know, you know, and I guess for us in corrections, where we see people that are willing to go to those extremes, cutting themselves and hurting themselves just to get a message across. So we know what people are capable of doing to get what they want. You know, so it's like, oh, well, I don't think somebody will really do that. Have you ever worked in a prison or a jail? You have no idea what people are willing to do to get some level of control over the narrative of what they could be facing. Joe, what's your thought on that part?
Yeah, you know, and you know, regardless of what their mindset is, you know, if they're acting out or they're making the claim or they're attempting to hurt themselves as a manipulation tactic, either way it goes, we still have a duty to respond. We took an oath, we swore that oath. You know, we have that liability. We have to address the situation. And worry about whether it's a manipulation tactic or whatever later. But, you know, nevertheless, you know, if you have somebody who's hurting themselves or, you know, tying off at one end, but not tying off at the other, you know, and you could call the whole situation as bullshit if you want to, but you still have to address the situation. Because the one time you don't will be the one time that they hurt themselves, and that'll come back to bite you in the ass every time. So, you know, treat every situation as if it was real, as if it was, you know, a real claim, a legitimate claim, and, you know, let mental health sort that out. You know, that's not for us to do. You know, our job is to keep them safe from others, and keep them safe from themselves.
Yeah, and as I said, guys, you know, if people are leaning on the medication saying, well, he had to have been sick, he was given medication, medical may have had to give it to him because you got to act on universal precaution. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, you know, hopefully this dialogue has helped the public understand things a little more clear. You know, don't take everything that the media says is gospel. You know, if you have questions, I mean, hell, reach out to me, reach out to Anthony, reach out to Russ. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Don't take everything as gospel. You know, we don't, just because they're a high profile person, we don't take them and just toss them in a hole and forget about them. You know, we have a duty to protect them just as much as we do the public. You know, and for the naysayers and you know, the members of the general public and the news media who say that, you know, that the system is so barbaric that we lock them away, you know, I want y'all to think about something. If this was your son or your daughter that committed this heinous crime, wouldn't you want us to protect them as well? You know, I know if it was my son, I would want the system to protect them as much as they possibly could from, you know, other offenders, from other threats, from other possible attacks. Folks, that's our job. We have to do this. This is what we're sworn to do, and this is what we're going to do, regardless of who the person is, what crime they've committed or alleged to have, you know, have committed. We have that responsibility to do that. And just because we keep them away from general population, we put them in a more isolated environment, doesn't mean that they're in a black hole somewhere and we're shoving trays of food through a slot in the door.
All right.
You know, so just understand that, you know, as correctional professionals, we have a job and we have sworn to keep the offender population safe just as much as we are sworn to keep the public safe. And we're going to do that for him. We're going to do that for you. We're going to do that for your family member. We're going to do that for whoever comes into our custody, because that's what we're sworn to do, and that's what we have to do.
Yeah, and guys, I think this will be the last video I do on Richard Allen. The case should be settled soon with the trial almost coming. The defense is doing their rounds. You know, they should finish up. And I think we did our part just to provide clarity. And then I'll try to see what other cases may fall into something we can discuss. I like breaking down some of those interview and interrogation stuff. But I think, you know, it's a perspective. Again, we're not there. If we were working in the Indiana Department of Corrections, I'm sure we would provide a good argument for the state, only because, you know, we live it. You know, we see the games that are being played, and it's just another attack on the system that people are buying into because it's just agenda driven. You know, it's a general idea of what it's like, and it's not. And you attack the hard work that gets done there. We don't allow someone to fall that far back, you know, eating their own shit and all this other stuff. I mean, we don't. But there are benefits for inmates to act out. And sometimes be like, well, that's super extreme. And as I said, guys, you have no idea what they're willing to do to get attention, or at the end of the day, maybe get that lawsuit. You know, you just don't know. So I'm not saying that every case is fake. I didn't say that. But, you know, you got to weary what Pandora box you open. That's all. That's the dialogue. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.